Imagine driving on a dark road and suddenly see a stopped silhouette on the shoulder, asking for a lift. Would you stop? Today, you will hear stories that will make your nerves freeze on each curve of the road. If you want to continue on this dark journey, already leave your like and subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any minutes of this chilling experience. Now, let's go straight to the first report. A few years ago, when I was 25 years, I got a break before picking up my children from school. The mood was perfect. So I decided to drive a little for the alternative routes of my small rural village. Listening to radio was when I passed a guy who raised his thumb trying to find a ride. He seemed to have between 30 and 40 years and held a fishing rod and a backpack. Like I was alone, I preferred keep driving. But as I continued, I started to have a tip of guilt for not having stopped to help. You imagine that if I were in his position, would like someone to give me a support beyond, that I had defined a personal goal of getting out of my routine. So I took an initiative. If he was still there, when I made the return, I would take him about 10 minutes later. I was still there. I was a little tense when I stopped to call him, but already had a security scheme. If something wrong the moment he sat in the car, I noticed that I probably made a terrible mistake to start. It appeared being under the influence of some substance and smelled very badly, beyond that I analyzed in a way that would leave any woman uncomfortable. Just noticed how nervous was when he asked for a cigarette, and my hands trembled so much that I could barely take one of the driving package helped disguise the dread. But internally, I felt terrified by creating several scenarios of what could happen. His name was Marcos, and he lived on only 5 minutes from there. Then the race would not be long. During the route, he reported that he had lost his license for drunk and divided the address with an elder in a house. Also tried to persuade me to enter his residence and back the other day to drink. When I finally parked at the destination, I noticed it was a precarious cabin full of old cars and debris. He descended, but he kept insisting that I went together. I denied and left, feeling a huge relief and even a certain pride to have won my fear. A month later, I found that someone had been killed on the same road where I left Marcos. I saw his picture in Facebook and the news that he had been detained for stabbing someone to death in that same house. Information was disturbing. He wounded the lungs of the victim, who bled to the end in that address to worse. I realized that the old man with whom he claimed to live never existed, dwelt alone. There was a horrible experience, and I'm sure I never. But I will give a ride to a music unknown a few years ago, just after completing the high school I spent. Time moving from one sofa to another, and I stayed a period at my friend Julion's house. His family lived approximately 50 kilometers north of the region where I worked, and his mother usually took me to the city early when I went to Julion, and I used to stay, even at dawn in the city, leaving with the crowd, so we often needed rides or even catch strange ride if we wanted to sleep at his house. On Friday, we took too long in the city and lost the ride with his mother. We were bold young people and we thought we were invincible, so we didn't even think much before trying hitchhiking back. We looked forward to the highway junction with a finger raised, and we got a place with two very comrades. Haitian faces. They transported for most of the route and left us in a city about 8 kilometers from where we needed arrived. Everything was going well, and we were happy to have gone so far so fast. We walk around the region, we stop to drink something, and follow north exit to seek another help. We quickly get a man for 40 years that showed sympathy to stop. He said he would pass exactly the way that we wanted, and we hardly believe in our luck. I sat on the front seat, and Julian went to the back seat as we arrived near our departure. The subject suddenly leaned his hand on my leg, immediately pulled his hand away of him, and stared at him seriously. It was already dark, but I said to the man we could go down right there and follow the rest on foot. I wanted to get out of that vehicle, the guy, but said, "Quiet, okay? Everything in order? I leave you there and then put your hand again?" I was outraged, and I sent him to stop the car on time, already touching his pocket to pull my blanket. In that minute, Julio, in the back seat, grabbed the subject's neck and began to suffocate him to the screams so that he interrupted the car. The driver dropped the steering wheel and tried to pull Julio's arm to let go of the vehicle, began to lose the course, serpenting on the asphalt, and we were still more than 60 km/h. Panicked, thinking that we were colliding. We were facing a large tree on the side of the road, and the driver must have noticed because he stepped on the brake at the last moment. The car softened enough to jump, so I shouted "Salta" to Julio. I opened the door and threw myself on the floor. The guy noticed that I escaped and accelerated again. The door almost hit me as it closes, and the back wheel went to the very little distance from me. The car again accelerated quickly to some 60 km/h in seconds. Julio threw himself in the middle of the track, but I found that he also escaped his grabbed, and we were dragging into the forest in the road margin. The car made a maneuver at about 100 meters and started come toward us. We lie down and cover ourselves from land and clay till we were as discreet as possible. Both were injured and bleeding by the fall on the asphalt. The man went slowly looking for, trying to find us, came to take another lap and passed again. Whenever he disappeared, we advanced through the vegetation towards the home of the parents of Julio, who was still a few kilometers. Every time we noticed a car coming, we dived on the floor and hidden the vehicle of that lunatic. Must have circled the road at least 12 times, trying to track down. We take almost 2 hours to cover the final kilometers through the woods in the darkness. When we finally arrived, we were all soaked and exhausted. The parents of Julio were horrified by seeing his father was an intimidating man and very big, almost 2 meters high, very strong, with a complicated genius. Instead of calling police, he led us back to the road and left us there as the bait, waiting for the subject to appear, while he hid in the forest, prepared to attack him. We stayed there for more than an hour, but the driver did not reappear, what left me divided. If he had returned, Julio would certainly have beaten him until he almost killed him. What would be fair, but I feared that the guy was armed. After all, as he intended to kidnap 2 men at the same time. The mother of Julio made us complain to the police the next day, but we never knew if it was arrested. Estari main nunc hitchhiking more, and I don't offer strangers either. In the adolescence phase, I resorted to riders with friends. This was common, especially before something like Uber. My colleagues and I, we always left these adventures with curious causes that nothing serious had happened to us so far, only we had certain basic caution standards because we were young people and females. The main one was never entering van and refusing rides if there were more than 2 men. Unfortunately, I ended up leaving aside these rules, and I got into trouble at the time. Many clubs accepted children under 18. The bartenders differentiated those who I could drink for a bracelet, but it was not difficult for me, and my colleagues exchanged the bracelets. And look, more old women was all in the 1990s, when the standards were much more loose. We were in one of these places when my friends decided to leave. Only I had told my grandparents with whom I lived that I would be in a colleague's house, so I didn't hurry to leave. I ended up leaving my friends leave without me when I finally decided to leave. It was already a little beyond the limit and probably appeared too drunken. I sent a message to my colleague saying that I was going to her AP. I started walking the 3 or 4 kilometers to the building where she lived when a car stopped next to me, and the driver offered to me taking the boy. Seemed attractive, and as I was altered, I ignored all precautions. I went up in the car, even being a van full of something I knew I shouldn't accept at all. As soon as the van door closed, I realized that it had made a huge bullshit. The boy I found attractive. He called his lap in the front seat, and I, naive, I went then that he started touching me, and the atmosphere changed there. Radically at the time, I understood that I was at great risk. I tried maintain control and pretend excitement. So I started talking about a secret event that would occur in that night. I invented that there would be a lot of drugs and models waiting for us. Idea was to confuse them and make them think it would be better to take me to such a party than to act unhealthy there. Even the driver then asked me to sit on his lap again. And again I agreed, trying to lengthen the conversation and make him get his hand out of the wheel every second. I noticed that they just searched some isolated place to let go, and I had certainty of what could happen if they found a point like that. I followed with the conversation, stating that my friends were waiting and that I needed interesting boys for my luck performance worked. They decided to take me to the condominium where my colleague I lived, believing that this party would be there. The set of buildings had some towers and an internal park. I asked them to park across the park about 100 meters from where I really wanted to get to, pretending enthusiasm, and I detail how amazing the celebration would be. As soon as the door, I opened Salty Davan. As soon as possible, I heard shouts from the boys running after me, but I didn't look back, just followed. Rather than going straight, my colleague's building hid in the condominium next to a ladder with some bikes. Started my heart flush so much that it seemed that they could hear I shrink with the closed eyelids, as if I don't see them. They also didn't see me. I could hear them looking for me by calling for me. The terror was big. I was still there trying to contain panic and decrease the breath past a time when I heard nothing more added courage, and I left my shelter going to my colleague's app. I reached my destiny in security, never accepted hitchhiking. I know how lucky I was in that night. Everything that could have gone wrong to this day. Thank you for not becoming a statistics. I took from there a very important lesson that never again. I forgot a few months. A friend of mine exaggerated the drink in a ballad and finished having an alcoholic poisoning. Was horrible. Witnessing the paramedics coming and finding it completely erased. I was desperate, but I could not accompany her in the ambulance. The problem is that I couldn't get to the hospital. My device was without battery because I used it a lot in that night to make pictures, and I ended up forgetting to charge. He hung up for back of midnight. I still tried to use other people's cell phone in the club to ask for a transport app, but no one agreed to help me. Without phone, and not knowing to which hospital my friend had been taken, I was totally and without any track than to do at 2 a.m. I decided to go to a gas station near, hoping to use the landline there to contact someone. When I arrived, I managed to call and find the right hospital where my friend was relieved to finally have this information, but a new setback came up. I still had no way to arrive to the place without cell phone to call an app car and without money for a taxi. I continued to walk the courtyard, frustrated, without knowing what attitude to take it, that a guy who seemed to be there good time came and asked if I needed help, explained the circumstance, and in a desperate act, I asked if he could take me to the hospital. Of course, that I would not usually ask something like that to a stranger, but I needed to help my colleague. He mentioned that he was going to his residence and that the hospital was on the way, so he driving me, got into the car, and in the 15 minutes of course, we exchanged a few words. He looked a normal individual with nothing abnormal when we arrived, thanked and exchanged contacts because if it was another wrong hospital, I might need another driving. In my view, that was just a precaution. At that moment, my focus was to arrive and confirm that my friend received help, but less than an hour then, while my cell phone carried at the hospital, I started to receive messages from that individual. At first were just banal questions wanting to know if I was well, but soon they won a tone dubious. He started asking for intimate photos. What made me amazed was horrible to note that he interpreted my gratitude as something totally inappropriate. I blocked the contact immediately, feeling a stomach tightness, but it didn't take long, so that I received text from another number clearly of him, but now in a much worse tone. He promised to kill me. If I didn't send what he demanded, that was enough. To call the police, how I had his original number. The authorities got tracking it. I don't know exactly what they did, may only be a reprimand, but I was no longer bothered by him. It was terrifying to realize that while I supposed he was being helpful, in fact, he had hidden intentions. I am grateful to have been able to get to the hospital safely and that he did not do anything on the way. but people like that are the reason I never bump. Music urgency. Me and my older brother Edgar were on a trip of camping on the coast. As always, he chose the place and took care of everything. And I just accompanied him, but he selected well. The camp point was beautiful, and because we have to walk there were not many people. Where we saw it didn't seem to have anyone around the camp space However, it was not clearly delimited. It was difficult to know if we were in the official area. There were multiple clearing among the trees that showed good to arm the tent. But in the end, this did not do much difference. We took a grassy area and installed everything. There at first we thought the place, it was little busy, but soon we noticed that we were not right for some belongings scattered. There is nothing huge like whole tents or backpacks, but smaller things as a trail stick or old shoes. It was not normal to see these items dropped mainly on so remote campsites. Strange, but we kept our routine. We did almost nothing but chat and be calm when night. We light a fire and stay around a few hours. Then I watched something behind Edgar pointed out without knowing what I saw as both. We looked in the same direction, and after seconds we saw a small flame far away. Was far and partially covered by the vegetation, but the orange shine blinked in the dark. If not, were it by the clouds covering the lunar light, the forest blackness would have blocked everything. We were not alone after all. But the bizarre is that in that part there seemed to be only closed forest without clearing or spaces to set up something. Maybe whoever was there maintained distance. We don't think much about it and we continue. Of course, we take some snacks and drinks and continue to get even sleep. Come erase the fire and slept near midnight. I fell asleep without difficulty. However, at some point in the dawn, I woke up. I had only been 2 hours since I lay down, and I knew exactly the reason. I had drunk too much before I lie down and had to relieve myself. Tent walked about 15 meters away from the place so as not to attract animals, and I did what it took. But in the meantime, I noticed that flame distance still burned, perhaps by the tiredness I was stopped by staring at, that my eyes got used to darkness. And suddenly I realized something extra. There was a stopped silhouette at some point between me and the distant bonfire. My chest accelerated, but I tried to believe it was just a shrub or strange shadow after all, who would be still there in the pitch near our dawn camp, trying to understand better. And then I noticed that it was not just a person. Several were scattered throughout the realm, trees apparently observing directly to me. A shiver traveled my body. That hell was that for a moment I thought it was delirious. I turned hurried to the tent, hesitated to wake Edgar, because if it was imagination, he mocked me. I opened his tent and shook him to wake him up. He was initially stunned, but agreed that I thought I saw something and wanted to confirm, contradicted, and followed me to the place, but we didn't even have to walk a lot. They moved. Now we're closer, scattered among the trees. At that moment, I still hope it was imagination. But then I stared Edgar and saw the clear dread in his face, wide eyes and pale face. He saw just like me. I looked again, and not there was doubt were people. I saw the subtle movements while we stared at us. Took a few steps back towards the tents. We need to leave. Edgar's voice shaking. I never saw him like this. It was always safe. I always knew how to deal, but there was petrified. I just agreed any from us. Took nothing. Out of car keys and wallets, we ran away quickly, taking the trail back. It didn't seem like they came back the next morning. We looked for the police to tell what. We thought we should do this, but they didn't take us seriously. I could see that they thought we crazy, as an entire group would be in the dawn forest, only watching. We mentioned the strange objects we saw in the camp and hoped that other people had reported something similar, but there was nothing official. Bulletin about it may have. No one has denounced or no one returned to tell. Music. This occurred about 2 years ago in half of spring. I took my job clearance to camp in a small lake, isolated. I had been there a few times with colleagues or family members, but this time I was just the trail. There lasted about 2 hours, but it was not pulled. The trail was almost every straight. I raised my tent and straightened things a little away from the margin so as not to be on the edge. Then I sat on chair, I had a beer, and I was enjoying The noise of the water and the birds, as it was late. I wouldn't have a long time before sunset. I always liked the forest. After dusk, quiet, and almost gave a sense of freedom. Something difficult to explain. But that night, it was different. The sun disappeared. I lit a bonfire and stayed there, but a feeling strangely took over me. Something that was not normal and made me feel that someone watched me. I looked around in the trees and in that darkness, with certain apprehension, almost paranoia. I had never felt, so I didn't understand what was going on whenever I looked. I didn't see anything, but the problem was the darkness. I don't know if I could notice something even if there was someone there, even though there is no real evidence. For this restlessness, I tried to ignore these ideas and relax, gradually distracting me, thinking about personal dilemmas. Nothing very nice, but perhaps better than terrifying me. The hours passed and closed from 10 or 11 p.m. I heard a very loud stalk before me, as if a thick branch broke under a large weight coming from somewhere right ahead. Everything was very dark, impossible to see something, but the noise was so intense that it echoed through the forest. Chills traveled. My spine seemed that something heavy stepped on a branch. It would be a huge animal or a person I didn't know. Which of these options gave me the most fear? I took the bear spray and shouted someone there, but came no answer, or a noise felt that if it were a big animal, I would have heard his steps. The foliage being wrinkled and shrubs stirring remained there by a time, looking at the darkness, trying to hear anything. So I remembered to get the lantern, put a hand in my backpack, and ascendi must have passed a minute or two when I illuminated the area. And I found nothing. I started to get too paranoid this time. I reinforced the fire with more wood to make sure it stayed on, and illuminating the camp from time to time. I took the flashlight and examined the place in one of these times when I turned on the flashlight. I noticed something on the edge of the focus was no doubt a man, and very tall, not in an abnormal way, but perhaps 1.95 meter. He walked away, in an instant of the clarity disappearing in the dim light, where the light did not reach my heart. Fired. Would my intuition were correct, all the time came to mind the noise that I heard before it looked robust enough to produce that strong snap. The man was huge, should weigh about 115 pounds for sure, and that meant that I watched me without me noting. For knowing how long I got into panic, I started disassemble the camp and embarrassed everything I knew where he had run from light. Then I ran in the opposite direction by luck. It was also the course of my car. After a while, I felt safe enough to connect the flashlight in weak mode and follow the way while walking. I searched. Imagine why he would be there, any sinister objective, I had no doubts. But if he was so big, because he didn't attack me or stole immediately, why it was just watching me? The only explanation that came to me was that perhaps I wanted to check if I had a gun or expected me to sleep. I reached my car and went, although I still make trails, but never with the same tranquility after that night. Now I live with the feeling of being observed by something I can't see. I hope it's just one impression. This was some time ago. I believe that in 14, I lived in an area well green, surrounded by much forest, and with several small camps. An hour or less had a holiday extended 4 days away from work, and as I had not been traveling for a long time, I decided to go to one of these camps to spend a quiet weekend. The place I chose was small, had an area of land where it was parked, and there were 3 points available to assemble the tent already. There were ready-made bonfires and even some barbecues and benches that looked precarious, but still gave the 3 points for spending were released. So I chose the left and put my things there. The walk of my car to the place was just 5 minutes, but the forest was very closed and wooded, so it still looked like I was in the middle of a wild region. Besides, the camp was about 45 minutes from the urban area. After a time, I realized that I didn't know very well what to do. I could just get relaxed or reading something, but it was indecisive. I considered that perhaps there was a trail there. So I came back to the entrance to see if I thought a sign was nothing, but noticed that there was another car stopped near mine. Was a well-read Toyota old man, damaged and rusty. The weirdest. It was that there was no license plate in front or behind. I didn't know what to think, but I deduced that it could be from someone camping in one of the other spaces without much to do. I returned to my place and sat on a trunk. Only 10 minutes passed, and I heard steps behind me. I looked at back and realized a man coming through the trail without any backpack, and I stared at me directly, like talking or asking for something. He appeared to have about 30 years, but almost seemed older, for the sloppy way of introducing himself to the jacket brown was full of tears and dirt, hair and greasy beard, and restless. "You could help me with a little thing?" he asked. With nothing to do, I agreed, and I was standing. But he soon said, thanking and saying that I wouldn't need to still resolve some things first, but that would come then, to call me if I still needed me. I agreed again, and it was not understood why he came there if he did not need aid at that moment. But I thought it might just dismantle something in the car and would come back there in 10 or 15 minutes. I waited about 30 minutes if it passed, and then a while the sun started to fall, and I assumed that he had realized everything was what was after 2 hours. I didn't even remember him anymore, and I was focused on the fire camp. I fed the flames and set my dinner when I heard steps backwards. I looked at me, but now it was too dark. I just heard the noise of the steps in the trail, but he was wrapped in pitch. Nor could he see the outline, heard the steps in gravel slowly approaching. The luminosity of the fire was the same individual as I presumed, without understanding why it came up so late. "And then you are ready. I just want your help quickly," he said. I noticed the strangeness with what I asked. What he ignored my question, saying it would be fast, and that I didn't seem busy, with a forced smile that was pressurist, and he avoided responding clearly. My social shyness screwed me because, nervous, I agreed, since there was nothing better to do, and he insisted, smiling again, and he went on. As we walked away from the fire, the darkness grew, and I realized how strange it was for him not to use any flashlights. It also seemed tense to follow him in that dimch. Then, what kind of help was asked? He reduced the step as if to explain, but remained silent. My heart shot. My body realized something wrong. Suddenly, the night silence to my surrounding, it was oppressive, like the pre-tempostal calm. I walked slower, trying to create space between us. Without highlighting this, I gained some meters until he turned to face me. His fake smile became in a rage countenance. To see that I was a little far, he stopped, and me also. Before I could speak, I saw his hand sticking inside the jacket and turned, running into the forest. I just spotted the cable of something that could only be a knife. I heard his heavy steps behind me and his breathtaking breathing as he pursued me for about 2 minutes until it was slowing down, and then only my steps by the forest. Fortunately, I had cell phone and keys with me. I called 190 when the police arrived. They only found my car. The red Toyota was gone, and the man also reported everything to they, since both the car and they were quite peculiar, but it seemed that it did not. I believe it was obvious what I intended to roll that night, but there was no clear motivation besides being alone there. The way he waited to darken to act, and once appeared day, to induce me, to induce. Following it was something coldly calculated that others people can fall into it, or maybe have already. Was me and my partners lived in a national reserve. I was about 10 minutes by bike from my house and living in a small town without much fun. We were going to explore that forest whenever we could, not know much of maps. Nor did we have mobile phones with GPS, so it was not the most sensible practice. But after years going there, we already dominated that area. When I had about 15 years was the first day of the summer vacation. Me and a close friend called Danilo, we were celebrating the beginning of the holidays, doing a night in my room. Probably we would be in the video game until dawn, but near midnight, the energy fell. My father raised and tried to reconnect, but it was some blackout in the neighborhood. Then, nothing to do any of. We were sleepy, since we had taken energy a few minutes before wanting to turn the night. After a few moments of monotony, Danilo asked if we had already visited the forest at night. A strange question and unexpected, but it was also curious that we had never gone there at this time, although we died close, and we traveled those trails for over 10 years. For some reason not. The idea of exploring at night appeared. We took my empty backpack, we put some lanterns inside, and we pedaled to where we used to enter the forest. Was a space of land by the road, where we always dropped the bikes. There we noticed a vehicle stopped. Later it seemed like an old SUV with a spoiled way, but all the lights were turned off. Then we imagined that we had been dropped our bikes on the floor and advanced to the trees. As soon as we entered, we had to catch the flashlights because the darkness was complete outside the woods. The moon illuminated well, but inside it was all dark. I don't even know why we insisted on this idea, probably just because we had never done it, and we sought adrenaline. It was not long before the tension emerged. Looking back and no longer seeing the road was interesting to hear the environment of the night forest, and also scared. Our excitement a little was decreasing as we were entering, and I at least felt one discomfort. Was as if that initial energy was gone, and now the feeling of something seriously wrong. For several minutes we have been silent, listening strange and half-anguished noises around, enlightening with our flashlights. So we heard the crack of a branch on our left. The sound reverberated in the vegetation, and we point to the lanterns there. In the clarity we identified a man stopped at about 12 meters away. Was still, because it was well bizarre, see a mature man there and not imagining what he would do there. He had a dark leather jacket and a hat hiding his long hair. His eyes were large and scary. Took about 10 seconds, where we remaining exchanging looks, until we noticed that he wielded a shovel. Danilo leaned and whispered softly, "I think we should run now," just that, just to make me react. And we ran back the same way, covering the lanterns with t-shirts to hide the focus. We come to our bicycles, and we realized that the car previously stopped on the road. Had we went out quickly on the bikes, and we moved to my house. I even wanted to tell someone, but I knew that even if we did it, we do not see enough details to describe your face or identify the car. After of that night, I stopped going there. I think if we had come closer or insisted in talking to him, may not have been here to narrating the story. In 2021, I made a car trip without a definite route, had never done something like that. But I had some camping trails that I intended to know are true. I didn't reserve hostel followed and stopped at the beginning of the trail with the idea of being all the time camping. This proved to be a failure because I appeared too late. It was already 17 hours, and the route to the camp was about 4 hours. I took a head flashlight so I wasn't so worried, but it would certainly not be better not to run, that there was no more car at the entrance. The place was empty. I started the walk as fast as I could. Without risking, after 2 hours, the sun started to download, and around 8 p.m. was almost in horizon line. Took a 5-minute break to recover my breath before final stretch. I sat on a fallen trunk next to the trail and drank some water. When I took the head flashlight, I heard leaves stirring behind me fast. I turned on the light and pointed back without seeing anyone, or at least anything within reach. From the lamp, I waited a little, but the sound ceased and the silence prevailed. It seemed. Step, but not enough to identify. Perhaps it was just a deer. I thought. I got up the flashlight and I continued the trail. The darkness increased, and for the next 30 minutes, I was able to see reference points or any more distant panorama. I saw whatever was on the beam of light. I focused on moving without stumbling up. Sometimes I thought, listen to footprints again, but when I stopped to listen to no sound, I thought I was getting paranoid. Maybe some animal following me, and it didn't comfort me in this situation. When I approached the 4 hours of walk, started to get distressed. I thought it would arrive before and had no idea how much battery was still left in the flashlight, but it was possibly little. I continued apprehensive in the woods until I heard the noise again, this time closer and smoother, exactly as a human step made me jump and look suddenly, but I saw nothing alone. The trees and shrubs everywhere with the weak flashlight seemed that I didn't. Seeing nothing, "There is someone there," I shouted, but only the sound of the crickets that drowned out everything. I started backing, looking at the point where the noise came from. After about 10 steps back, I heard something light on my right. I turned the light in that direction, and at that moment, a shrub has been shaking intensely, making the leaves vibrate for a second. I saw a leg running. More inside the forest. I was immovable completely after a few moments. I recovered the control and went quickly away from there. I found a place about 1 mile ahead where I hid, and I ended up without drawing attention. I didn't sleep almost anything, but no, I saw or heard the person again. It was clear that they followed me, and I didn't want to advance more in the darkness. The later day I returned to my car. Apparently I lost the persecutor, who I would bet if I had gone to the camp, they would be waiting for me or would appear at night to do so. What